Good morning, welcome to our podcast Empower Today on Friday the 8th of May. It's my wife's 40th birthday today. I want to wish that lovely lady who is brilliant for me a very happy birthday. Today I'm going to read to you a story which was written by one of our church family here called Andrew Perry. And then from next week on I'm going to link the podcasts to the sermon from the preceding Sunday. So both of next week's podcasts will be about gates, because on Sunday at 10 a.m. we're looking at Jesus is saying, I am the gate. And just to deepen those thoughts a bit and keep it all connected, to be honest, I'm learning as I'm going along with this. Our community work coordinator, Gemma Graffin, said to me about 4 months ago, why don't you do some podcasts? And I kind of almost laughed at her of, why am I going to do that? And now we're doing 2 a week. Thank you to those of you who said you find them helpful. That's really, really good. Please do feel free to email in if you've got any questions or comments on the podcast, and I can weave those in to following weeks if it's helpful. So this story by Andrew Perry, I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm not going to make any comments afterwards, because I think this story is a parable. And Jesus told parables in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. It was his most common way of speaking to people. And a parable is basically this. It literally means in Greek, laid alongside. Laid alongside. And it's a simple story laid alongside a deep truth. So there's always a point in a parable, and Jesus wants us to understand that. But he doesn't explain it. You'll see sometimes in the New Testament, after he's told this parable to the crowds, that his disciples, his closest friends and followers say, Jesus didn't quite get that, can you explain it to us? And then he will explain it to them, such as the parable of the sower. But to the crowds, he left them hanging. And you may think, why did he do that? That's not very caring. But I think it's the most gracious way to communicate. Because what it does is two things. For those who are just listening because they're bored and they want something to do, it just goes over their head and they don't think about it. But for those who are genuinely searching, that simple story becomes a deep truth in them. And as I think it's Eugene Lowry, the preaching professor from America, says, it explodes in their souls sometime later. And so Jesus is gracious in his communication. He said, I'm not going to lay it on you heavy. How many times have you heard sermons that are so blindingly obvious and downright boring that you could finish it before it's finished, that you just switch off anyway? The sermons I reckon that we most engage in are the parabolic ones, the ones that are like parables, where we think, I don't know quite where this is going, but it's intriguing, it's interesting. Maybe you've had 1 or 2 sermons in your life like that you've experienced in that way. A parable laid alongside a simple story, laid alongside a deep truth, that if we're really listening and we're really searching, explodes in our soul and changes our life. So this is Andrew Perry's parable, read with his permission, and it's called The Banquet. My story begins around the 10th of April. The clatter of the letterbox distracted me. There on the doormat lay a blue envelope. Delivered, not posted. It gave no clue as to who sent it. The handwritten calligraphy in black ink just contained my name. The envelope was of highest quality, and on the reverse an embossed sealed crest in red wax. I was not inclined to break the seal, for it represented status and importance. Worth keeping, I thought. And anyway, the message inside could be easily accessed by a paper knife. Inside the envelope was a card edged in gold. It was an invitation to a banquet. It simply said, William, for that is my name. You are invited to a celebration banquet at the King's Arms at 7:30 p.m. on June the 15th. And then in block capitals, come just as you are. The host, it said, was to be a famous person whose name could not be revealed for security reasons. Now, not being a regular customer of this watering hole, nor indeed a particular friend of the landlord of the King's Arms, I was nonetheless flattered to be invited. Clearly, there was a special reason that I should be included on the guest list. I will not bore you with the weeks before June the 15th. Suffice to say that I decided to impress the host and any other guests with my best efforts. I resolved to wear my mohair dinner jacket, smartest dress shirt and bow tie. I considered this to be a fitting gesture for such an unexpected invitation. On June the 15th, at the appointed time, perhaps on the late side, I walked into the King's Arms. When I arrived, I was greeted by the concierge who guided me through the saloon bar into a function room which I'd never been in before. The room was not large, but able to accommodate about 20 people. A long trestle table went down the centre of the room, and at one end it was crossed by a high table in a T shape with 3 empty throne-like chairs. The party was already in full swing, and increasingly I felt uneasy by the strangeness of it all. The concierge then guided me not to a seat on the trestle table, but to the high table where I was seated in the middle chair. For a moment I felt deeply honoured. Perhaps other distinguished guests would join me, but then I realised that there were no place settings. Below me, the other guests were tucking into a scrumptious meal. The party was in full swing. They were dressed in simple everyday clothes, some even in torn rags. The host, who I did not recognise, was seated in the centre of the trestle table, encouraging each guest to tell a story or share a joke. There was toasting, clapping, and much laughter as the wine flowed. Occasionally the table would fall silent as people listened, spellbound, as if moved by a special experience. After about half an hour, and feeling increasingly confused by these happenings, I watched as the host slowly rose from the table and came towards me. My moment had come. I stood and held an outstretched hand of greeting. Impassive, the host stood before me. The room fell silent. I resumed my seat. "Why have you disobeyed me? I asked you to come just as you are. You've not followed my instructions. Please leave at once." At this, the concierge stepped forward, and with firm grip on my elbow, I was frog-marched with resolute step to the exit. All the other guests fell silent. The host was motionless. Outside, a thunderstorm beckoned. I will not bore you, dear reader, dear listener, with how I felt. My journey home, now a blurred memory, is one I prefer to forget. But I tell you a strange encounter, the result of which changed my life forever. On arriving home, I climbed the stairs, my feet stamping on each tread in my anger and shame, my curses audible and violent. I tore off my clothes, flung my jacket against the wall of my room, each garment now strewn on the floor like a dismembered limb. It was then that I noticed amongst the discarded garments another blue envelope, and on the back was the same sealed crest as before. Open it. How could I do that after all that had happened? I stood by the open door, and it was then that I heard a quiet voice. It was gentle, familiar, and seemed to call my name. "It's ready. Come downstairs. The meal is prepared. Just you and me. Come just as you are." A parable laid alongside, a simple story laid alongside a deep truth that, if we're listening, explodes in our soul and changes our life. God bless you. Stay safe.